You're good. You're good.
So I have been recently very obsessed with beans.
Oh, yes.
Beans on toast.
So you've sampled my care package.
I sampled your care package, and I may
Wow.
be in love. I may be in love with British food.
Wow. So yeah, so you've had the taste of
I I
Heinz
did.
beans, 57 varieties. We're not
Yeah,
sponsored, by the way. This is not a paid promotion.
I wish. No, um, I do. I really like them. They're very different from American, like baked beans. We have those. They're kind of
Mm,
similar, but American ones, of course, are very sweet.
yeah.
um, and often have meat in them. So of course that's not an option for me. But yeah, they're quite tasty. And you sent me this lovely care package that had like all this amazing British food. And one of the things that was in there was hobnobs as well, which
Yes.
I was having like a few right before the stream just to sort of like pad out my food intake for the day to get me through the stream. And I was noting that it was sort of like it would be like if graham crackers were good.
Right.
I
I've
mean,
never tasted a graham cracker.
so graham cracker has a very similar flavor to a hobnob, but it doesn't have any oats in it. So it doesn't have that bulkiness and that oatiness.
Mm-hmm.
Even on the
Well,
hobnob's like container, it says the oaty one,
right.
which,
Yeah.
graham crackers are just plain, but they are a lovely base for s'mores. So
Yeah. There
if you
you
ever
go.
come over here, I'll make you s'mores.
Marvelous. I can't wait. I can't wait. Maybe you should send me some graham crackers.
I'll put it in the care package that I'm making. I'm making yours as opposed to like just getting an American food sampler because you got to get the exact right brands.
Right.
Otherwise, it's
Okay.
not going to be good. I could send you some terrible American chocolate as well, but we'll see.
Please do. I'm told that it tastes of cat vomit, but there we go.
Oh, I could send you cat vomit as well, but I think I'll like
I
avoid
think I'll
that.
pass on that one.
That's going to be a weird customs tag. You know what I mean?
I'm not sure it would get through.
So, welcome to Dreamland, everyone. My name is Melinda,
And mine is Conrad.
and today we are going to be talking about our mystery topic, beans. We had several people on Patreon and Facebook both guessing what we were going to be talking about today. So I thought it might be fun to kind of go through. We had several people voting for Mr. Bean,
Oh,
which
right. Yeah.
good guess there. Something called Beans Baxter, which I think maybe tangentially related to Fritz the cat. Somebody,
Uh,
or I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know what that is. So that's not it. But there were a lot of votes for that. So I feel like I need to like look it up. And then Sean actually guessed things that you buy that seem insignificant and wasteful at first, but lead to bigger and better things. So I guess Jack and the Beanstalk ish, right?
Oh, I see. Yeah, yeah. Very clever.
So that's kind of cool. And then D Hatfield actually guessed. He's the only person who correctly guessed our topic for today.
Well done, D. Hatfield.
And that topic is, of course,
Beanie Babies.
Beanie Babies. Your audio needs to come up a little bit, Conrad,
Okay.
according
I will work
to
on
my husband.
that.
I what? I'm not. So anyway, let's start talking about the background and history of Beanie Babies. So first off, I came across this topic like last year before Iconicon, and I
Right.
almost did a whole panel at Iconicon about this whole thing because it's such a rabbit hole and it's so crazy, and I really didn't know anything about Beanie. I mean, obviously I've heard of them. It's hard to have lived through the 90s and not have heard of Beanie Babies. But there are so many connections, which is what our podcast is all about, with so many things that we talk about at Retroblasting anyway, which is like collecting and like collecting fads and all those kinds of things. So it just sort of seems like a perfect intersection of us talking about this.
Yeah.
So, did you have any Beanie Babies as a teenager, or I guess you would have been my age, so
Yeah.
probably would have been a
No.
little too old for that.
And also, I don't think it was as great a phenomenon over here in the UK. Now, I know, having done all the research that we've done, that it did have a pretty good revenue stream here in the UK, but it was not a phenomenon that touched me in any way, and I still don't own any.
Yeah. Well, I can't say that.
No. You've been bitten by the Beanie Baby bug.
Not completely, okay? Like I
Okay.
am not I'm not going to the dark side. I just have a few and I will show them and I will explain why I have them, but I have all of my Beanie Babies, all 4 of them right here. And that's all I'm going to have, guys. That's it. That's the end of the Beanie Baby thing. Um so yeah, the origins first I wanted to start off with just as a quick aside, we will be reading super chats at the end of the show. So just I'll periodically remind you of that. But please feel free to do those, and I will read them later. So I wanted to just really quickly skim through the history of stuffed animals and toy fads and stuff like that. So um, the origins of stuffed animals really came from Margaret Steiff, who is a German woman who had polio and survived. And then she had this whole right sided weakness, but she really wanted to make she started off making stuffed elephants that were like pin cushions. They weren't billed as stuffed animals because at that time, back in the late 1800s, it was seen as sort of frivolous, which was not good. And so they switched. Turn your volume up again.
Oh no. Okay.
Here, let me do this. There we go. I've turned your volume all the way up.
Okay. Hopefully, I'm not too loud now.
Well, people ask for it, people gonna get it. All right. So, she had polio. She couldn't really work her right arm, so she literally turned the sewing machine around backwards and sewed these things backwards to be able to use her left hand because she was weak from the polio on her right side. So and then of course that led to she eventually started making stuffed bears. The bear on the left in the image is a Steiff bear. And that was around the time that Teddy Roosevelt had his whole bear hunting situation, and teddy bears sort of became a very trendy thing in the early 1900s. And from there, lots of different stuffed animals were made and we continued to have plush. Now, I will say, like, plush, like back before, like probably the 60s or 70s. So this is from the 70s, and this is like an old school teddy bear. It's not a Steiff, okay, but it was bought in Switzerland by my parents when we lived over there. So it's got like 5 points of articulation, and it's
Oh wow.
hard. Like you can't tell by looking at it, but it's not like a soft. It's soft because he has a lot of fur, but its body is hard and firm, and so like you can pose him and sit him down and turn his head. Like it's like a hard body as opposed to like a soft, squishy stuffed animal like we're used to thinking of.
Yeah.
So, sorry, Mr. Bear. Um, and I've had him since I was 1. So,
Wow.
yeah, super old. But then, so that led into like toys in general, and just thinking of kids as people to be marketed to, much like we talked about last time with like the idea of teenagers and the idea of kids as being marketable.
Hmm.
We came up with like all these different toys that were marketed to kids in different ways, including all these different toy fads, including the hula hoop and the pet rock and chia pets. And in the center, way back, going all the way back to the 1900s, that's a cigarette card. They used to put little collectible cards in cartons of cigarettes to encourage children to smoke, and get them hooked early so that they would become addicted to cigarettes and become lifelong customers. We have like Furbies and Franklin mint plates and Pez dispensers. So there's all sorts of things that have these huge moments of fame where kids get obsessed with them, right? And then they become
Yeah.
really hard to find because it's a sudden spike in demand, and then people buy them up, and then the prices start going up. So then there becomes the speculative bubble, and people think, oh, this is worth all this money, and then it often doesn't hold its value in the long term, right? So that's the short version of what we're talking about today, of course.
Indeed. Yeah. And in particular today, we're talking about Beanie Babies and the man behind them, who is almost as interesting, if not more interesting, than the Beanie Baby speculative bubble. His name is Ty Warner. I need to be very careful what I say about him because he is known to be just a smidgen litigious. Um, so I will
Fact-based
refer to
statements.
fact-based statements that have been reported about him, particularly sourced from one of his significant others who wrote an unpublished autobiography, which
Hmm.
has since been quoted in a book about this whole phenomenon. So he's generally thought of as kind of a Willy Wonka, Wizard of Oz, Michael Jackson type of figure, and
Those
he
are
was a
not
salesman.
great, like, people to, children's toys. And anyway, just
It's an interesting comparison. Let's put it that way. He was a salesperson initially in the toy industry. He worked for a company called Dakin, and he was
mhm.
known for being quite the showman. He would dress ostentatiously, complete with a top hat and a full-length fur coat, and drive in a classic car. And he was always full of exuberance and charm when discussing his toys with store owners. And people just thought of him as like a magical, unknowable figure, and almost childlike.
Mm,
But yes.
sorry. Red flag, red flag, red flag.
Well, people could say that. Yes, they could. When he was at Dakin, which was in the 60s and 70s, which dealt in plush, he was a very successful salesperson. In fact, he earned more than the CEO of the company in commissions, which didn't
Oh.
always make him terribly popular. Um,
Well, he was popular with the ladies.
yes, he was. He was very, very charming by
Yes,
all
very
accounts.
charming, and loved the ladies, was not as much interested in hanging out with the gentlemen. He's very competitive with the guys. That's what most people seem to say.
Most people, yeah. So he was very good at sales, very good at sales.
Mm.
Um, but yes, people did tend to think of him as there were various people would express that they felt like he was a damaged child, and Ty's sister Joy has since reported that the father of the family, Hal Warner, abused her, and
Mm.
when she told the mother, she disowned her for quote sleeping with her husband.
Right.
Interesting attitude to take. The father apologized to Joy decades later, claiming it was his way of not cheating on his wife. But Ty claimed that Hal did this all the time, his sister says. So there was an acrimonious divorce. Ty was sent to military academy where apparently he was bullied and hazed by a culture that focused on breaking kids down. And Joy claims that Ty was knifed there once. His mother was a paranoid schizophrenic, I believe,
Yes.
and not terribly well institutionalized at some points. So, yeah, it
Yeah.
wasn't the smoothest ride, I don't think. growing up for Ty.
No, it seems like he had a lot of issues that he came by very, like, honestly, like, it's not always his fault, but it leads to laying the foundation for, I think, why and we're bringing this up only because it really forms the personality that created these toys, which I never would have thought about, but now that I've so just so you know, and we'll be talking about this more later, but we both read a book about Beanie Babies, which we'll point out the title and give credit to that later, as well as watch there's an HBO documentary called Beanie Mania, which really goes into a lot of this stuff as well. So if you have a lot of interest, definitely check both of those out. But yeah, it's a little it's weird how much those things seem to influence his ability to create these toys and this company.
Yeah, it certainly gave him a lot of traits. It seems to me that sort of were instrumental in their success and in creating this phenomenon. It also unfortunately had some side effects in terms of how he related to people. So we have some funny stories about him for
Funny,
being funny, and these have
weird,
been reported by others yet again. Um,
right?
so yeah, he despite being a very um, affluent man, very successful man, he was oddly well, he was reported to be quite stingy with his money. One of my favourite anecdotes is he offered to take the 5-year-old daughter of two Dakin employees, Roger and Betty Erickson, out for ice cream, which they thought would be a lovely thing to do. She's 5-year-old girl, but when he pulled up in his Rolls Royce, he asked her if she had any money with her, and when she said that she didn't, he sent her back inside to get some because he was not going to pay for her ice cream.
He said with his top hat and full length fur coat.
Yes. Can you imagine Willy Wonka sending a kid away to pay for?
Actually, I can. I mean,
Well, yeah.
I feel like he really really does live up to the whole Willy Wonka thing a lot. Um,
Quite. Yeah.
yeah, there were a lot of weird examples like that in the book. Even including his sister says that when their father died, Ty waited 5 days to tell her, so that he had time to get all of the antiques that were in storage and put them. Oh, and he was also notorious for telling everyone who ever rode in a car with him to never pay tolls. Like he would just take pennies and throw them and just go, "This is an illegal tax," and then just keep going, which is sort of like foreshadowing, right? What ends up happening later
Hmm.
with not liking to pay taxes very much. Um, yeah.
Yes, quite. And even in the height of his company Ty Inc.'s success with Beanie Babies, even then said to be not terribly generous. So, for example, one of his employees, Lena Trivedi, the company's 12th employee, who has to be credited with a lot of things. She came up with the idea for putting poems, cute poems that gave character to the Beanie Babies on the tags, which
And
became
wrote most
quite
of them
famous. And
initially.
yeah, wrote them. Yeah, like for the first full line, she wrote them all herself in 48 hours or something crazy.
Yeah.
And she also launched a website which in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, quite a pioneering thing. Not many companies were doing it, and certainly not in an interactive way that sort of generated buzz around products and yeah. So that was all her idea. Now she was still earning $12 an hour at the point where the company's sort of reporting billions in revenue.
Wow.
And when she asked for a six-figure salary, it didn't go down well, and she ended up leaving. So, yeah,
Yeah.
poor Lena.
Yeah, poor Lena. And you see her, she's in the documentary, she and her brother, and you can tell that she had it was this amazing job that she got while she was in college, and she was like a sociology major in the 90s, which I can like totally, cuz I was a sociology major in the 90s, so like I'm thinking, man, if I were in her position, and then I got the opportunity to, like, when you work for a small startup like that, you get to wear so many hats and you get to do so many things, and it empowers you, and you feel like you've got all this amazing experience, but it's not always necessarily marketable in like
Yeah.
these bigger companies. And so that ends up kind of being what happened to her, although she seems by all accounts to be doing just fine today. But I know it was hard for her for a while. So yeah.
Yeah, it was. So, yeah. So, a few examples of interesting interesting behavior. I mean, there are some other ones like when he was doing his stalls at trade shows, showing off his plush creations.
Hmm.
He would be very particular about the look and setting them up, and he would sort of scream and make his employees take everything down reportedly if he wasn't
They
happy
weren't
with how it
perfect.
looked. Yeah, and he would be brushing the hair on these things all the time and making sure they made eye contact with the buyers. And if people who were of a more generous frame touched them, he would get really, really anxious and panicky and try and keep people of a certain weight away from his stall
Yeah,
because he was.
he thought fat people were all sweaty and that they were going to sweat all over his toys. And don't sweat on my toys. I'm trying to sell this. You're
Yeah.
gross and horrible. That's his take, which, and that came up several times. So that was, unfortunate. But
Yeah, he was also apparently known for commenting loudly on the weight of other patrons in restaurants when
yes.
he was seated at a table. So, yeah.
If you can turn your volume up a little more.
Oh my.
I've got it turned all the way up on my side. So
Yeah, me too. So I'm not sure what to say really.
yeah, don't know. It's as good
I'll
as it's
get
going to get.
closer.
Listen to our podcast later that we will download as an audio stream, and we'll tweak the audio in that.
Mm.
Um, all right. So, yeah, there was also one of his girlfriends talked about when he took her to his bedroom for the first time that he was much more interested in talking about his pillow collection, where each one of them came from, than he was, anything else that might happen on a date. Um, which was just interesting. He's seems like he has a lot of like really hardcore attention to detail, which again, he would sort of build into a lot of the mania that comes with Beanie Babies. So that's the reason that we're talking about it. And another interesting thing that was pointed out was the babysitting incident. So at one point he was babysitting that girlfriend's children, and he kind of just suddenly freaked out because he like couldn't be responsible, like because his parents had sort of like emotionally abandoned him in all these ways. His dad was this traveling salesman that was never around, and his mom had serious issues, and so um he just felt like he had been abandoned as a child, and so he just had no idea how to be a parent or adult to children. And
Mm.
so it just sort of sent him over the edge. One of the interesting things that I noted, that was just a very little aside in the book, was that his favorite movie is The Picture of Dorian Gray,
Oh wow.
and
Okay.
um, which the author points out is about a cruel and unaging man, which kind of seems like, because I don't know, like Ty Warner, this is not debatable. He is definitely obsessed with plastic surgery, which makes for a perfect Michael Jackson comparison, because like he just keeps getting more and more and more and more, um, and it's just sort of weird. Like he doesn't ever want to age. He's obsessed with being skinny. He's obsessed with like image, like a lot.
Yes.
And he's very perfectionistic. So, as we've already kind of talked about, like everything has to be perfect all the time. Like his house has to be perfect, everything. So, he's very kind of OCD.
Yes.
Yeah.
He is, but not when it comes to paying his taxes, it turned out,
That's too bad.
because in 2013, Ty Warner pled guilty to charges of tax evasion going back to the 90s. He accidentally, I'm sure, hid money in a Swiss bank account and had a 2-year probation sentence rather than a potential 5-year custodial sentence because, rich white guys, they always get consequences, don't they, for breaking the law?
Yeah, he just that probation had to be challenging, I'm sure. I know he had to do some community service, which involved working with, like, students on, how to sell T-shirts or something like that, so he was
Yeah,
still
apparently it was a very good session. The students seemed to really enjoy it. So
well, thank goodness for that.
there you go. Debt to society paid.
Check. Check it off the list. Um, so I think we already kind of talked about how he worked for Dakin. Now this is a sad state of affairs, you guys, but I have this dog, the stuffed dog, who's missing his little nose, sadly. But this is a Dakin droopy dog.
Ah,
He's actually a beanbag dog, and this dog came out in like 1973. He does still have a tag. He's probably covered in child spit or something. But anyway,
ew.
he's a really well loved toy from my childhood. But he is Dakin, and he is a beanbag dog. Like his body is slightly understuffed, as you can see. He's kind of floppy.
But was he always understuffed, or has he been sort of
Yeah, yeah.
cuddled
He was
until
always
bits of
kind
him
of
came out?
he was kind of his seams are all well intact. He's just always been kind of understuffed. So that's my point
Okay.
in showing this, is just to show that Beanie Babies, while they were more understuffed and smaller than this, it wasn't a completely innovative, brand new idea that had never been done. It just sort of took it to a certain point. So yeah, that he left Dakin around 1980 because I think he was fired, right? Because he was selling his own stuff to a lot of his clients that he was supposed to be selling Dakin stuff to. I think he
Yeah.
disputes that, but that's what they said at the time.
Mm, yeah. So, yeah, struck out on his own, had a full start with jewelry and music boxes,
Hmm.
which didn't really take off. At the same time, he formed a relationship with a neighbor, Patricia Roche, who proved to be essential. If you're watching, you can see her on the left here. She proved essential to the early success because she was highly organized. I get the sense.
Yeah, yeah, she's very organized, and she was really bossy boots as well. Like she had this relationship with him, which he apparently seemed to appreciate, which was that she would just cuss him out and tell him, like, wouldn't put up with his BS at any
No.
point, and would call him out in front of a whole group of people. Like, she did not care, and she, like, stood up to him, and I think he kind of liked that.
Mm. Yeah,
Um,
he got off on it.
it
Nobody
was
else
like
could
his
talk to him
nobody
like she
else could.
could.
No, but that was definitely their relationship. Like, she would scream profanities at him on the phone. He would just be like, "I don't like it when you use profanity," and then she would just come back with more profanity. So, she's
I
kind
like
of
her already.
she's delightful to read about. Um, but she is his girlfriend, like, throughout, like, the lead up to, and they break up right before the Beanie Baby thing happens. So
Yeah.
Patricia is there, but during that time, which this would have been in the 80s, all the way through the 80s, he made these stuffed cats. That was like his thing, was these stuffed cats. And I actually had one of these. They were these big white fluffy cats with these really cute little eyes, and these were the things that he would be brushing at these trade shows and plucking little fur things out from around the eyes to make sure the eyes were really big and really stood out, and would make eye contact with the cute little, like, sad face, so that people would feel compelled to buy them, right? And he
Yeah.
really understood all of that, and that's when he was really going crazy with making sure that they were set up and displayed and brushed and not touched by fat, sweaty people. Um, um, and, like, there's a note here that he sold $30,000 worth of cats in a single hour at the Atlanta gift show. So he was a
Wow.
very, very good salesman, definitely not taking anything away from his ability to sell. He was very knowledgeable and excited about his wares. He loved selling plush. He was really good at it.
Yes, and he had this idea of understuffing these stuffed animals so that they weren't rigid, so that they were more they had more long-term playability and more character, and they were more cuddly.
Hmm.
And he had one that was a particularly big hit, Lovey the Lamb, huge, particularly in hospital gift shops,
Right.
but was discontinued in 1995 because he was having supply chain issues with China, and this drew a lot of complaints from buyers at that year's Atlanta gift show. And three brothers, Brian, Chris, and Kevin King, who sold Thai products in that area, were at the show, and they listened to all these complaints, and they had the idea of saying that Lovey had been quote unquote retired, inspired by something that they remembered from an artist called Tom Clark, a sculptor, who designed these gnomes in North Carolina. And he would occasionally, in a fit of pique, destroy one of the molds without warning and just announce that a particular gnome would no longer appear anymore, that it had been retired. And using that kind of terminology, that kind of concept around a toy line, sort of intrigued buyers. And they started to wonder which designs might be disappearing next and asking. And the salespeople were able to say, well, you really don't know. So, you might want to stock up, just in case. So, quite a cunning sales tactic, actually.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm.
And that sort of lays that foundation for everything that's going to happen in the 90s. So Patty, Patricia, and Ty break up in February of 93, and he starts dating Faith McGowan, the lovely Faith McGowan, and she will be his girlfriend throughout the entirety of the Beanie Baby craze. And I just wanted to show her picture because she was such a big part of it, but she doesn't often get a lot of credit because Ty is sort of notorious for taking credit for other people's ideas. So, for example, according to her, the whole idea to do the Princess Diana bear, which I think most of us remember the purple Princess Diana tribute bear that the Beanie Babies did, was her idea, but he never said that to anybody else. But she was both shocked and not shocked when he just sort of went out and took credit for that. So, you know,
He was known to do that. Didn't he do it to her daughter as well?
yeah, absolutely. There was a ghost figure. He was like wanting to make a Beanie Baby ghost, but it didn't have legs, and he's like, I don't know how to do that. So the little girl, she was like in grade school, like she was like 7 or 8. She drew a ghost and on a sheet of paper, and he was like, "Oh, that's cool." And so he ended up making it, and then he said, on the little tag, it was like "Spook the Ghost," designed by Jenna, and I won't say her name, but Jenna with her last name. And then like he changed his mind after a few of them, not a few, but like after the first run of them were made, and changed the ghost state and said the ghost name was Spooky and took her name off of it. But then, of course, that was one of the first. This is an example of what Ty would do. Is because of his it was not an intended thing to make rarity or to make money. It was because he was very George Lucas like in the sense that he was constantly changing his creation after it was already produced. So he would make the first iteration of one, and then he would go like I'll just take this cougar guy here. Like if he goes, "Oh, well, I don't want his nose to be this color pink. I want a slightly different color pink." So that's not what happened with this one, but if he did that, then you would have a second version of this that would be a variant. So you'd have a dark pink and a light pink variant of this character guy, and then the first one that had the shorter run would be worth a lot more money. So that little ghost with Jenna's name on the tag was worth like a ton of money. So those are the types of things that when you're getting into looking at Beanie Baby collectibles, you're looking mostly for Beanie Babies that were early on in the run and also were the very first versions of themselves that had like changes, sometimes 2 and 3 changes for I'll call them characters. I don't know what else to call them, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Just like it's hard to come by the theatrical cuts now.
exactly. Exactly. Yes. Um, so, and then it looks like we've got let's see. Ah, so spreadsheet. Are we at spreadsheet corner already?
We are. We
Okay,
are. Our
wow,
favorite place.
that's our favorite place to be.
It is.
So I wanted to, as part of the things that we're talking about today, and in doing a lot of this research, one of the themes that kept coming up was what I just talked about was that example of the first iteration. It's sort of like if you're talking about Star Wars collectibles and you have like something like Blue Snaggletooth, right? So Blue Snag is now worth a ton of money because he was this mistake that wasn't
Mm.
intended and initially wasn't worth a lot, but became worth a lot because there weren't as many of them. So it's just a supply and demand situation. And so rarity usually is the thing that drives up prices for things and value for collect professional collectors. And that includes like not just toy collectors, but like stamp collectors have like these weird specific things that are super valuable because they're rare. Like I think it's called the inverted Jenny is one of the most valuable stamps because it was like printed upside down or something.
Oh, right. Okay.
So, I reached out to all of our patrons on Patreon and I did a poll and I just asked them about like, what is the reason that you collect what you collect? And I thought that the results, like, what motivates you to collect what you do? And these were the answers. Rarity, which is by all accounts a very important thing that influences the market of collectibles, was the least chosen reason for why people
Wow.
collect what they collect, which I thought was really interesting. A lot of people mostly focusing on nostalgia, filling out like lines that they couldn't previously get or that they just like. So most of our patrons anyway, and this is not a scientific because it's just a cross section of our own fans, but you know, focusing really on things that they just truly like, not doing it to make money, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is like an interesting idea.
Yeah. I love that the joy of the hunt is in there as well because that comes into the Baby phenomenon at some point
Absolutely. I
too.
mean, you have to have that as part of any collecting. I know for myself, I don't do a lot of collecting, but I do tend to want the most rare things. Like,
Yeah.
and I don't know if that makes me a bad person, but like I know that I like want the thing that's like super hard to find, super rare. It doesn't even necessarily have to be something that everybody wants. I just don't want to have the same stuff everybody else has.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's fair enough. For me, it's always completing sets.
Okay.
And that just means that I end up buying things that I don't actually want, but I have to have them to fill the set. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
not great. Not good
No.
behavior.
Yeah, so one of the things, I think you've got here, you're talking about small stores only? Like
Yeah, so we were looking at the strategies that Ty used in order to sort of spark up that collecting fad amongst Beanie Baby enthusiasts when the line started to take off. Because initially, he launched it in 1993, the first lineup, and to begin with, they were not flying off shelves at all. And so, this idea of retiring them and introducing this idea of like a rolling selection that the lineup would change and maybe you should get something before it disappears. It was also it was also that he would only pick small stores, so he would go for gift stores, the mom and pop toy stores. He would never go for big chains, never go
right.
for supermarkets, no big box stores at all. So it meant that you really had to look for them if you wanted to get them, because he would only sell them in small quantities, but some of it was quite cunning. So the salespeople would go to a store that would usually only buy sort of two or three of a particular item, and
Mhm.
they would say these are limited to 8 per store, and they would buy 8
Yes.
even though they didn't normally buy it. But just something about that limit being there meant that they, oh, hang on, it's limited, I better get some.
That
So
it's a thing, and they've done
yeah.
now all this market research about it, and I'm not an economist or a marketing person, but there were a lot of things about, like, you know, for false and forced scarcity being, and it's certainly used in various ways, which we'll talk about a little later, even in all areas of collecting and certainly in adult collectibles and stuff like that. But this is we have to think like this is the 90s, right? So the internet was there, but it wasn't really there. Like, it wasn't there the
Mm.
way it is now, and so you couldn't really just go online and determine, like, what is the normal cost for this thing and what are all the variants. So, um, we'll talk a little bit more about, like, all the things that drive it, but for sure, the use of mom and pop stores, like, little Hallmark stores and little things like that is where you found these. And like, so when you're going into your neighborhood store and you only see like 5, it does feel like they're very scarce, even though the reality was that they weren't really that scarce. It
No,
just seemed that way.
it did, yeah. So you end up with mum and daughter teams in Chicago suburbs. I think that's really where it took off because that was sort of around the base of where Ty's first
Yes.
headquarters were, may still be now. And
Yeah.
so they would be scouring all of the gift stores in their local area trying to find that one Beanie Baby from the lineup that they didn't have or that they couldn't find. And then slowly they would sort of spread out into neighboring states, and some mums were even phoning because you couldn't go to online and find out all this stuff, so you
No.
would phone chambers of commerce to get lists of gift stores and toy stores so that you could sort of phone them all up. And yeah, they're
Yeah.
ringing up thousands and thousands of dollars in phone bills they were
Well, yeah,
saying
because
on
this
this
was the
documentary.
days of long distance, right? Like, this was when we
Yeah.
had 10-10-3-2-1 and 10-10-2-20 and all these things that I don't know if you guys had over there, but we had all these little codes you would, like, type into your phone before you would call a long distance number to, like, save on all this long distance. But these people were racking up $2,000 worth of a phone bill every month, calling all over the country and sometimes all over the world. Like, I know in the book they talk about a lady who made an order of $2,000 worth of Beanie Babies from Germany, which
Wow.
were very like they were not a thing in Germany, but here they were like these were already all discontinued Beanie Babies that had been shipped to Germany. And so she got all of those and then was able to sell them for like I don't remember, it was like 200,000. Like, it was like an enormous amount more. Like, some of them, like, she got like 7 or 8 of them, and each one of them was like $1,000 a pop, you know?
Wow. Yeah. So, yeah, pre-internet scavenger hunt going on here, which
Yeah.
the dynamics of that are really fascinating when
Yes,
you remember the dial-up era.
for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. And speaking of which, they also were an early internet adopter. So they had a website with lists. Lena, we talked about, had pioneered this. So they had lists of Beanie Babies so that you could see all the ones that were available and which ones you had and which ones you didn't have. And a guest book where the secondary trading market really began in earnest with people doing swaps amongst themselves. And it wasn't really about value or speculative value, it was just people trying to complete their collection at this point. So fairly innocent when it began.
Mhm.
But pretty soon it started to get a bit manipulative with a character that Lena was controlling on their info beanie, who was giving cryptic clues about which ones might be retired or which new characters would be coming along, and the retirements would fuel panic buying.
Absolutely.
People rushing out to try and find the ones that were going to disappear off shelves before they disappeared.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And then, so I don't know, I wanted to really quickly look at this lovely slide you made about the princess bear values. Um, so the princess bear is one of these that a lot of people are super familiar with, and they want to think that it's worth all this money. It started out all of them started out being $5, $5 to $7. And then
Mm.
it started selling for $350 to $400 on the secondary market, like, it came out in '97, of course, then it started going up, and then there's, like, a rare Indonesian variant that sold for as much as $3,000 in the middle of the craze, and then by 2022, which is now, of course, people say they go for $170. I guess they may be, but there is some manipulation that I think is also happening even now on Beanie Babies on eBay, where you can search for completed listings and sold listings and see that certain things have sold for these high prices. But I feel pretty positive that people are buying their own things just to like show up in search results. Like it's a manipulation. Like it's don't
It
believe it,
is,
guys, is what
yeah.
I'm trying to tell you. Like, don't you can find Princess Bear for like $8 if you really want one. It's not worth money from generally speaking. So don't just
No,
be really
there are
careful.
people listing them on there for $150,000, and
Yeah.
it's shown as a sold listing with one bid, and you
Yeah.
think,
Yeah.
really?
It's shady. It's real shady.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Well, since we're talking about statistics and spreadsheets, I wanted to show my personal emotional roller coaster with this whole topic.
Oh yes.
Because uh, initially I was like, this looks really interesting. This is going to be super fun. Like Willy Wonka, I'm super interested. Tell me more. And then once I figured out Ty Warner was a thing, I was like, oh my God, this is like insane. I have to know more. And then I started reading the book, which felt like I was studying, and that was not as much fun. But then, like, when you watch the documentary, I just was like, I want to watch more. Like, the documentary ended, and I just wanted to keep watching more about it. And then as I was finishing the book, I also like started feeling really sad because the whole Ty Warner, he as a person is kind of a sad person. And it's kind of a bummer. But then I I bought Beanie Babies.
Yeah.
And
So
look how cute
hooked.
they are though. Look. Look. She's so cute.
Yeah.
She's
I'm not going to
floppy.
start. It could get
Do it,
bad.
Conrad. Join me.
There'd just be a huge mountain of them.
Um, yeah, so I think the fad, speaking of these guys, the roller coaster like certainly was hitting in like 97, like 98 were like the peak years of it, right?
Yeah, and just to give you a sense of just how big it got once it started to take off. So in 1997, eBay had $500,000 worth of Beanie Baby sales in 1 month alone. Sellers were averaging a profit of 500% on the retail price. A complete collection could sell for $100,000. Dealers were making $30,000 per show at collectors' markets. And the secondary market also generated sort of these tertiary sort of industries around it. So you would end up with people publishing pricing guides, unofficial price guides, and they were making a huge amount of bank on this as well. And then by the time you get to 1998, by then it's accounting for 70% of eBay auctions in 1 quarter alone, which it's just astonishing when you think about it. Ty became the #1 toy company in terms of sales. One of the collectors, one of the Chicago moms, Mary Beth, she
Mhm.
launched a magazine, a monthly magazine, which had a paid circulation of 1 million copies at its height, Mary Beth's Beanie World. And Thai UK ran up $47 million in sales. In Canada, 55 million. It's just astonishing numbers, really, when you look back on it, and that's echoed in Thai Inc.'s sales figures. So it starts out in 1996 when there were 51 beanies that had been retired. His sales increased by 1,000%. They reached 400 million in 97, 1.4 billion in 1998, and in 1999 they were quote over a billion, but it's not known exactly what they were. And then in
Mm.
the 2000s, the whole thing pops. Sales
It's
declined by 90%.
I like your guys skiing down the slope on that one. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's crazy because it's like with Y2K, like if you want to know when the Beanie Baby bubble burst. Say that 5
There you
times
go.
fast. When that happened, it was literally Y2K, and it's because Ty had gone online with that whole info beanie thing, which was like a little Beanie Baby that would pop up on his website and say, "Oh, and he said he was going to discontinue all Beanie Babies and that was the end. And
Yeah.
then like he did this very manipulative thing at the very last minute where I think he panicked and he was like, "Oh, well, I'm going to let the audience vote to see if they want to keep having Beanie Babies." And
Mm.
in order to do that, when you call in, it was almost like, I don't know if you remember, but like way back in early days of American Idol, you had to like pay money to call in and vote.
Oh yeah.
And it was like a total obvious scam. But yeah, you had to call in and like pay 50 cents to vote. Like, why would anyone call and pay to vote no? I don't think you should make more. It was a gatekeeping strategy, but at any rate, most people obviously supposedly voted for them to continue. But by like that whole tactic completely didn't work because everyone started evaluating like I've already been spending thousands of dollars on these beanbag things and now it's going away and Y2K is happening and a lot of things are changing and I need to like dial it back and start selling off my collection. And so even though he then created a new wave of bears that included a black teddy bear that was called The End, and he had like a little fireworks on his chest. It was like literally the end though of the fad. It was just so weird that it was just that easy to break it. And it
Yeah.
was
Just
already gonna happen, like, it was just already part of, like, the whole speculative bubble bursting, like, it was gonna happen no matter what, but
yeah, it was really peculiar. Just a loss of trust, almost a loss of faith in it, and just also this. I think it had reached saturation point
Mhm.
by that time because everybody who was going to become a collector was already a collector at that point. So the whole supply demand equation flipped on its head and there really wasn't any false scarcity and it was just apparent that everybody could have them if they wanted to, and this
Right.
speculative value that everybody was banking on just vanished, so the whole thing collapsed
Sure.
shockingly rapidly.
Yes, it did. Um, but as we've kind of talked about this, but I did wanna kinda just really quickly run down some of the things that were in place that really drove Beanie Babies to be a fad, because some of it is applicable to a lot of other types of collectibles as well. And so they're kind of things to watch out for, although some of them are just really part of that time period. Like, it's just sort of it was the right time and right place. So the biggest thing by far, I would say, was retirement. Him retiring certain characters, as again, I'm gonna call them characters, certain Beanie Babies, um, was like a huge thing that prompted people to like want to buy any new Beanie Baby that came out, because if it was changed or discontinued, then that first version of it was going to be worth a lot more money.
Yeah.
So, people who were hopping onto the trend though by 97 or 98 were already way too late to really make a lot of money, because the people who really made money were the people who knew about it in the Chicagoland area more in like 95 and
Yeah.
maybe early 96 before it really got huge. Um, but you also had like the term soccer mom, I think, was invented in 1995. And then the next year was when Beanie Babies broke, and a lot of the stuff that I read talked about soccer moms being like a big part of this movement and this fad, because moms of that time were like getting their kids in the car, driving them around to like all these places, including going and buying stuff together, shopping together, going to the mall, which was a very 90s thing, at least here in America. Um, so you had like all of these women who literally all the first adopters of all of this were all these women who literally lived like a few blocks away from each other. You had like Becky and Becky, so the two Beckys, Becky Phillips and Becky Estensoro. And then you also had Dr. Paula Benchik-Abrinko and then her sister Peggy Gallagher. Um, all of these folks, along with, I think we've already talked about Mary Beth Sobolewski, who ended up making Mary Beth's Beanie World, they all lived like right next to each other, all in the same little area in the suburban area outside of Chicago.
Mm.
And So they started seeing these in their local gift shops and their kids started liking them, but then they very quickly took over the collecting part. Like the kids very quickly were like, I mean, that's now mom's thing. And I think part of it was that so there were all these variations and all these different ones of the Beanie Babies, but there was never a full list provided. And the the fans ended up making lists of all the different Beanie Babies, but because Ty didn't have like he didn't ever do any advertising. And think about the 90s, like even starting in the 50s, Mattel and Hasbro really started heavily relying on television commercials to advertise to children about all of their toys, right? Ty never did a print ad. He never did a television ad. It was just all word of mouth and all in these little mom and pop stores as well. So it's really counterintuitive in a way, like for it to be as big as it was, but that forced scarcity and lack of real knowledge and information. Like you couldn't take your Sears like yearbook that came out, your Sears or Montgomery Ward Christmas catalog that had all of like let's say Transformers in the 80s, right? So you could see the 1986 line of Transformers. This is everything they've got to offer. And I as a kid can look at that and go, "Oh, well they've got this playset, this vehicle, these 5 Transformers, and I want this one the most." But you don't even know what's available. And so for
Mm.
a collector, you're just like, "I have to know. Like, is this all of them? Do they have 4? Like, I need to know what the full list is." And, and so fans were literally making these lists and making lists of the variations as well. And you all know, like, a lot of you who are watching and listening, like, you're collectors too. And so you're like, "I have to have them all. I have to collect them all," like you said, Conrad.
Yeah.
So that was really smart. I don't know how intentional it was, but it definitely did drive all of that. So all of these things work together, along with the fact that you've got the internet was brand new, and then eBay happened right around that same time, like 95, I believe, is when eBay launched, right? And then it's just sort of like this perfect storm.
Mm.
And, I asked Bobby Valla like for a little bit of input, and he pointed out that like the comic book bubble had sort of burst like right before this time as well. So not so much for these initial folks because the people who initially were buying these were like soccer moms, but certainly by the time you get to like 98, 99, and you had just random people who didn't care about toys at all buying them for money, I think that that probably was like there was a hole in the market like, "Oh, well, we can collect this and not collect it, but like use this and prey on collectors."
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. It was just a perfect combination of elements that just drove all these soccer moms crazy. It's quite sad watching the documentary because there's interviews with a lot of the daughters where it's sort of like, yeah, this started out as a really fun thing that I could share with my mom during the difficult teenage years,
Yeah.
and then she just went insane. So the kids all
Yeah.
sort of backed away gently while,
Uh-huh.
yeah, the moms went crazy.
And even the moms would say, like, that it was fun for a while for them, and then the people who just completely only cared about profit came in,
Yeah.
and that was when it just stopped being fun, and it was just very cutthroat, and, that was when people were, like, you know, causing almost accidents on the interstate trying to, like, pick up spilled Beanie Babies that spilled out on the freeway during the McDonald craze and all that stuff, which we'll be getting to momentarily because I think now we're gonna be talking about some of the craziest things that happened during this whole phenomenon.
Yes. And the first example we have about that is the hang tag. So yeah, each of these Beanie Babies, they have a tag. Obviously, you have to have like safety information and which company it is and where it was manufactured, all of that stuff. But the fetishism around these tags for collectors, they have to be in pristine condition, no folds or bends in them. So then all of a sudden you have these plastic tag protectors that collectors are producing so that you can keep your tag safe.
Yeah.
And Ty tried to launch his own tag protectors, but he was too late. People had already jumped in and filled the gap in the market. But yeah, you got to get your pristine hang tag, apparently.
Mhm. For sure, and it's sort of they do a lot of that. I think we talk about the grading of some of them, which reminds me of the people who have graded comic books and graded action figures, who then get encased in these, like, plexiglass cases and certified as being worth, they're a grade whatever, and they're worth so much more money, which a lot of people think is a racket. The tag protector thing is probably a racket as well, although people even now on eBay, if you go on eBay now, you'll see, "Oh, this tag has a misprint on it, so that makes it worth so much more. All these errors are
Yeah.
on this particular one," and okay, if you say
Yeah.
so. Yeah,
Yeah.
um,
So there was hang tags. I also noted down the beanie wrap. One of the Chicago moms, Janine Marin Twardus, recorded a rap with lyrics about beanie collecting. All I will say is, I mean, look it up if you want to. It's about as bad as a middle-aged white woman rapping in 1997 could possibly be.
it's it's pretty it's pretty cringy, I will say. It reminds me a
Yeah.
lot of, like, when you see certain church groups making weird raps about Jesus, it kinda reminds me of that a little bit.
Yeah, it's that sort of humiliation that you feel on behalf of somebody
Mhm,
that's
for
really
sure.
painful. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I know we already touched on Mary Beth's, Beanie World, which, Mary Beth, she's sort of like the poster child for a lot of these folks, but, she's certainly not the only one of these ladies. I almost feel like these ladies got real competitive with each other. Some of them said they weren't, but I think they kinda were. But anyway, it's funny because she ended up getting sued by Ty Warner, because Ty Warner loves to sue people, as you pointed out at the beginning, and he came after her for using the term "Beanie Baby," like Beanie, I think, so she had to change her magazine's name to, like, Mary Beth's Beanbag World, which just sounds a little, it just doesn't work as well. I don't know.
No. In the US, is a bean bag like a big bag that you sit on, or is that not? Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. It's
Well,
not.
and it's
That's not
also
just
like
his.
we have like a beanbag toss at the county fair where it's like a
Oh
little
right.
beanbag and you like throw it through a certain hole and then if you get a prize or whatever.
Oh
So yeah,
right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
beanbags.
Yeah. Luckily, I think the her magazine was well established enough to survive that rebranding, but yeah, it didn't make an awful lot of sense.
Right.
One of the scariest ones I read was about a serviceman stationed in Hawaii who paid a woman to source and buy him stashes of Beanie Babies and hand deliver them to him, at which point he would give her $20,000. Was it in cash?
Yeah.
It's just insane.
Yeah. Like sliding
Unbeknownst
it
to
under
his
the
wife.
table.
Yeah, she had to fly it over there for him. Yeah, so she was just on these round trips to Hawaii all the time with a suitcase full of Beanie Babies.
Crazy.
Unbelievable.
Just
Yeah.
crazy. Um yeah, and then there were all these counterfeit, like, so this is something that happens, and we talk about this a lot with, like, the repro stuff with Star Wars toys and things like that. There are always, anytime you've got something that's, like, especially secondary market type stuff that gets really, really overpriced and popular because of, like, limited supply, you end up with fakes, you get and forgeries and stuff like that. That's true, we've talked about this across the board. That's true of even cars in some cases, but certainly, like, toys, stamps, art, anything. There are always fakes. And Beanie Babies were certainly no different because, of course, Ty Warner was having these things made in China, and it didn't take long for the folks over there who were making them to go, "Wow, these things sell like hotcakes. We could just churn out something that's almost identical and sell them for, like, these huge profits almost direct to the secondary market," right? And so there are all these, you can still find these. They're like Beanie Baby, videos on YouTube and websites that walk you through the ability to tell a fake from a real. So, there and in some cases, it's pretty close, like, it seems like it would be hard to tell unless you were just really already familiar with, what a real Beanie Baby looks like, so, I mean, let's face it, these are not particularly hard to make, it's just sourcing the exact right plush and getting the fake tag to look right and that sort of thing, but to me, I would have a hard time telling, not being an expert in telling.
No, and many of the speculators weren't particularly interested in the items themselves, but they would want to know they were getting the right thing. So, one of the industries that cropped up around Beanie Babies was authentication services. Peggy Gallagher, who we mentioned before, one of the Chicago moms, she had a particularly popular and trusted, and it seems quite lucrative authentication service that's still running today.
Mhm.
Currently, she charges about $14 for an authentication, not including postage to and fro. And she says on her website that she has authenticated 150,000 Beanie Babies. So if you do the maths on that, that's more than $2 million potentially that Peggy has made from this little side hustle. So
For
go,
you, Peggy.
Peggy.
Good for you, girl. That's outstanding. I wish that I had a skill like that. Maybe we could start,
Yes.
like, authenticating, Star Wars I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Just kidding.
Spotting those Stan Solo replays.
God forbid.
Quite.
Yeah, there was a so I'm gonna go to the McDonald's thing because really quickly, the McDonald's thing happened in, I think it was '97, right? So
Yeah.
throughout all of his time, in addition to not wanting to ever do advertising, Ty Warner would, like, never agree to do licensed products. So all of these companies were constantly trying to call him and get him to do, like, either a licensed version of something like, Scooby-Doo, like, I don't know if that was one, but I'm just saying, like, that type of thing, like a Beanie Baby version of that, which he never did, or they wanted to include Beanie Babies in their thing. So one of the examples that was given in the book was Steven Spielberg really wanted to include Beanie Babies in some of his movies and was constantly calling to get permission for, like, a product placement, and Ty Warner was just like, always, nope, not going to even take the call, refuse to talk to them, whatever. Until for some reason McDonald's came along and he was like, yes, this is what I want to do. I want to do the McDonald's thing. And so, and I feel like I'm missing one of your slides, but this is this is sort of what they did. So they did these teeny beanies and they were small miniaturized versions of Beanie Babies that were given out with Happy Meals. Um, and this is like where a lot of people really lost their minds, right? Like, I mean, it's just absolutely crazy to me. They were like sending their kids because McDonald's started putting limits, right, on all of the times that you could get you could only buy 2 maybe or whatever it was, and of course, people like Peggy and Mary Beth were like, "Oh, no, we're gonna put every one of our kids in line." Like, I have 5 kids, so all 5 of you are gonna buy as many as you can individually. Here's all your money to do that. And they were not just buying for themselves, but they were trying to buy extras so that they could resell them or trade them or use them as leverage within their own marketing strategies, right? Like people were doing a lot of that. It's
Yeah. Just so many, kids just being taken over and over again to this place in disguises and sent through over and over again to buy Happy Meals and then just tossing the food on the sidewalk just so that they could collect them all. Yes, and as you mentioned, that was the source of the incident where there was a spillage of teeny beanie babies on a highway, and there's footage of in this documentary of people getting out of their vehicle and trying to scoop them up off the road. They're in danger of dying, but the Beanie Baby craze was just so great at that point. that people were willing to die to
Yeah, I
get
mean, you're
hold of
talking
them,
about like a
seemingly.
10-lane interstate, and a semi carrying these things somehow spilled like a case of Beanie Babies out on the interstate. People are going like 80 miles an hour, and people are literally stopping their cars, jumping out and running and just grabbing a bunch and jumping back in the car. And it's like a news helicopter footage of all of this happening, and you're just sitting there going, what is
What?
happening right now? Like,
Yeah, and apparently the employees in McDonald's didn't particularly enjoy this experience either. So much so that at the end of it, they they minted a badge called "I survived the Teeny Beanie Babies," the attack of the Teeny Beanie Babies,
yeah.
which in itself is quite the collector's item now. But yeah, I mean, it did wonders for McDonald's sales figures for that period, and they sold out of them within, I think, weeks. They were expecting the um, the order that they took to last months, but it disappeared in weeks.
And I think that the staff were all really happy that that was the case, right? Because it was
Yeah,
absolutely nightmarish for them.
yeah, yeah. I don't think it was a good
Imagine
time.
like an 8-year-old coming in, to order like the third round of a Happy Meal, and he's wearing like a big hat and a trench coat. Hello, ma'am. Like, I'm in disguise. My name's Bob Smith, and I would like a Beanie Baby.
Oh no, a red one again? Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess you were able to request the one you wanted. Like, it wasn't like a grab bag, right? Like they could say, I want the cat, or I want the
No,
I
I
don't
don't
know.
think they could. I think it was pot luck what you ended up with. But I guess some people would go in with wants lists and just, I guess if you knew the guy that worked behind the counter, maybe that would work.
Because you have like 12 different options, but in my opinion, like I just don't think they're that cute. Like I mean, one of them's a lobster, you guys. Like, it's not great. I don't I don't get it.
No.
Um but yeah, so there was also a lot of like crime around Beanie Babies. So people were following UPS trucks around to like try to well, some people were following the UPS trucks to see when deliveries were going to be made so that they could grab up like as many as they could, right? But some people were following them to like assault them and steal the Beanie Babies. So much so that Ty had to stop putting their logo on the outside of their shipping boxes because when people would see them, like the UPS guys were getting mugged.
Right. Yeah, that's not great.
And then there was like adults fighting in court as part of their divorce. Like I've got this lovely slide of a couple who had this huge Beanie Baby collection, and this is in 1999, so this was really at the very end of everything. It's the end of their marriage and the end of the Beanie Babies fad, and they are literally the judge forced them to pour all the Beanie Babies out on the floor and fight it out, and they're literally kneeling down in the courtroom on the floor with these Beanie Babies, and it is the most pathetic thing I think I've ever seen in my life. Like, it's so sad. Like, imagine like your marriage is ending and this is what you're focusing on. Like,
Yeah, custody of the Beanie Babies.
God, I hope they didn't have children. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the kids are just in the background, like, what about us? No,
We
no
don't care.
comments on
No
that.
one wants them. The Beanie Baby that I want.
What a state of affairs, honestly. Yeah.
And then,
Wow.
of course, sadly, there was even a murder, which was only really tangentially related to Beanie Babies in reality. But at the time, it was like, oh, people are killing each other for Beanie Babies, and it was like this guy who um, he shot and killed his coworker because they were doing all this like buying up a bunch of Beanie Babies and then selling them on the secondhand market and marking them up a whole bunch. And the guy was like had borrowed money, and so there was like he shot him. It was really sad and everything like that. But um, it's just sort of showing like where it starts off as being like, oh, Ty Warner's like, I want them to be small and portable so kids can put them in their backpacks and take them to school and show their friends instead of having to like have their friends come over and play with them there. Like you can literally take them to school or take them out with you, and that'll increase word of mouth and all this kind of stuff. And then you end up with divorces and murder and people risking their lives on the interstate picking up trash. I mean, it's just insane, like
Yeah.
really insane.
Yeah. Possibly the most insane thing about it all is the speculative bubble that surrounds the whole phenomenon,
Yeah.
which I had a look into the 5 stages of speculative bubbles, because this really is just a textbook case when you read about it. And this is really talking about the article that I read on Investopedia was really thinking about sort of recent things like the .com bubble, the NFT, crypto, those sorts of phenomena that are happening in modern financial markets. But this, oddly enough, applies to Beanie Babies in the mid to late 90s.
Yeah.
Stage one is called displacement, which is where investors become enamored by a new thing. Stage two, boom, prices start lifting up higher at first, but then pick up speed as more investors jump in out of FOMO, fear of missing out.
Hmm.
Then you get to stage three. So that was sort of the Chicago Moms era. Then you get into three, which is euphoria, where
Hmm.
cooler heads don't prevail and market momentum is driving the way. So then it sort of goes from sort of swapping and things being sort of $200 on the secondary market to, thousands of dollars, and it just getting completely blown out of proportion.
Hmm.
You had one antiques and collectibles consultant and media commentator called Harry Rinker who was appearing on TV, pointing out that this was a bubble and it was going to burst just like every other bubble has ever burst. And he was nicknamed the Beanie Meanie as a result of doing this. Poor guy. But then you get to step four, which is where the bubble is popped, which is profit taking, which is where investors who figured out that this is a bubble and that it's going to pop start cashing out, selling off all of their collections, which kind of happened around the millennium with
Hmm.
Beanie Babies. And then step five, panic, which is where the whole thing just comes crashing down because people realize that the whole thing that they've been speculating on has no foundation whatsoever. There's just no intrinsic value to these things beyond their shelf price,
Right.
and it just all collapsed at that point. So yeah, the 5 stages of Beanie
Much
Babies.
like the 5 stages of grief that you
Yeah,
probably go through at the end of the Beanie Baby cycle.
yes.
Um, yeah, so it's so weird, like, we talk about modern analogs to this, and talking to Michael about a lot of these things as well, I started thinking about, what it if you compare it to something like that's not really like a Beanie Baby bubble, right? Like, you've got something like Star Wars. So Star Wars is tied to an IP that's like an actual movie franchise, so there's something that exists outside of the toys themselves, that is sort of driving its long-term popularity. And I have a slide here that shows sort of the timeline of like when the films came out, when the first figures came out, sort of, and the red line on this slide sort of talks about the interest and the excitement about having the toys, right? And the first peak of Star Wars toys from like 78, when those early bird figures finally came out, through sort of the mid 80s, was kids. Like, kids really wanted to collect Star Wars toys because they loved Star Wars, and it wasn't really about, like, maybe for a few people it was about, oh, I'm going to buy this for an investment or it's going to be worth a lot of money one day. But you really didn't like, I was talking to Michael about this earlier, you really didn't think about those toys being worth very much until like the early 90s, when the dark times ended and you started getting like the 90s Star Wars toys in the lead up to the special editions coming out, and then of course the prequels. And so Star Wars interest started coming back, and that's when those older toys who were just legitimately rare, right? Because they were played with by children, were,
Mm.
you had a 15-year gap between when those first figures came out to when they became quote unquote a collector's item, right?
Yeah.
And this is all just ballpark. Like, I don't have numbers to back this up, but this is just sort of to visually represent, like, you had a big peak in the early 80s, and then it didn't come back until the early 90s. So you had like a 10-15 year gap. Compare that to the Beanie Baby timeline, which is so much more compressed, right? Like, it starts in 93 is when the very first Beanie Babies were made. 95 is when the collecting started heating up. The craze kind of really hit in 96. By 97, you had the McDonald's Teeny Beanies, which really pushed it to even more people on a national level and international level knowing about it. And then by the late 90s, like 99, you've got murder, divorce, all that stuff going on. And then Y2K happens and boom, that bubble bursts. So within like a 7-year period, and really more like a 5-year period,
Yeah.
you've got like the real arc. And it's like a complete like arc from nothing to nothing. Like in
Yeah.
terms of interest or value beyond its just base price, right? So
Yeah.
if we had known, my point in showing this is, if we had started thinking about Star Wars toys as being worth money and being collectibles, right? Like in 1979 or 80, like right after those telescoping Obi-Wan figures came out, which are now worth a fortune, those original telescoping lightsaber Obi-Wans. Those were all broken and messed up because they were played with by kids because nobody thought of it. Like, we didn't have like tag protectors, right? Like
No.
back then, we didn't have, you had a few collectors who were laughed at by the news media at the time saying, oh, these are going to be worth money someday, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to keep them in the package. But most of the people buying them by far seem to be like kids, right?
Mm.
And so you had 15 years before you knew. And so by 15 years later, after those toys were created, they were all like heavily played with for an entire kid's growing up. So that made them much more rare. Whereas these guys, it was like a year really for most people after they bought them. Even if they had some of the early stuff, it was like pretty quickly you could see like, oh, these are worth money. And they didn't have time to get messed up too terribly bad. Like, it was more
Mm.
likely that you were gonna have some of these laying around not damaged, you know?
Yeah. Vacuum packed with their tags protected.
For
Encased in carbonite.
if only. Um, and so I think, we wanna sort of talk about, just as sort of some of the last things we wanna talk about are similarities to some modern things. And I think one of the big ones that people talk about now are Funko Pops. Like, Funko Pops being this sort of thing that you don't really play with. It's certainly, I would say the difference is that they are, from the outset, they are geared toward adult collectors. They're not really made for kids, although I guess kids could buy them. But I think they are very much licensed characters and actual people that you can buy Funko Pops of. Similarities to Beanie Babies for Funko Pops are that some of them do sell for extremely high prices. They have some artificial scarcity. They have like convention exclusives. Um, a huge number of them are released every year, even though they're scarce. But there's a whole lot of them out there. There is a big focus on keeping them mint in the package, so that kind of ties to like this tag protector mentality from the outset, right?
Yeah.
And they little tiny differences in things make a huge difference in price for the very same figure. So if there's like a misprint or something like that for the same figure, it can make a huge difference in how much something is supposedly worth. But the biggest difference is, again, like I said, they do a lot more licensed items, which means that they're a lot more tied to this time period. Like, they're of the time that they came out, right? There are a lot more of them. They have eight right now, as of today. I Googled it. It said that there were 8,366 different styles of Funko Pop.
Oh
There
Lord.
were definitely not that many different styles of Beanie Baby, right? But within each style of Funko Pop, there can be scarcity. So like this one particular Funko Pop, they may have only made 1,000 or whatever it is, 100. I don't know if any of them are that scarce, but I think that's where some of the scarcity on that comes from. And again, the convention exclusive thing is a big deal there. So I don't really know, like, if it's. I think that it doesn't seem like it's scarce enough. I know that you can find some that are selling for large prices, but they just haven't been around long enough for us to know how much they're going to hold their value. But they also didn't reach the over $1 billion sales like analog. They may sell over a billion, but I don't think that the curve is as extreme, I guess is what I'm
No.
saying, as it was for Beanie Babies.
No, I can't see people killing themselves on a freeway trying to get a hold of a Funko Pop. At least I hope not.
Yes.
Yeah, I've mentioned it before. One of the phenomena that I looked at in comparison to beanies was NFTs,
Mhm.
which, just in terms of a phenomenon, shares some similarities in terms of the artificial scarcity of digital assets was struck upon. So, for example, crypto kitties selling for six-figure sums. And it was also a means for fans to demonstrate a proof of their loyalty by being the first to secure a new release of NFTs, for example, from their favorite musician on sound.xyz or from Ticketmaster to prove that they were at a particular concert, for example. But the bubble burst pretty rapidly on that one, as speculative bubbles always do, when it became apparent there was no real utility. So the trading volume, I mean, this was really short. It crashed from $17 billion in January last year to less than $500 million in September. But the differences with this one is they think that the secondary market, whereas Thai Inc. never benefited directly from the secondary market. So Thai wasn't getting any of these thousands of dollars that they were
Right.
selling for
Right.
on eBay. Whereas I think with NFTs, the secondary market could benefit the artists who generate them because their ownership is baked into the NFT when it's minted. So when it changes hands, they can get a proportion of
Oh,
the
okay.
proceeds from
Yeah.
that, apparently. It's impossible to collect them all. I mean, you're never going to get collecting mentality around NFTs. And it may yet emerge, if I can use a Gartner Magic Quadrant term, from the trough of disillusionment into a plateau of productivity. There's some suggestion that this musician model, that they might be able to use it to generate more financial stability in the world of streaming, where the proceeds they get from streaming is not as great as it used to be from album sales.
Right.
And maybe even if it emerges as an in-game currency in gaming, where it has real-world value in the world outside the game,
Right.
that's sort of popping up in a few places. So yeah, there's some possibility of some sort of embers in the ashes of NFTs, but we shall see. It's a fascinating topic and not one that I pretend to fully understand.
Yeah, this part of it that is about marketing and finance is not my strong suit. So I would listen to things like where they would talk about, I think it was, I can't remember if it was Hot Wheels, but it was one of the little small cars like that, Matchbox or Hot Wheels, and I can't remember which one
Yeah,
it is, where they would literally like go in every 2 weeks and change the cars that were available in the big box stores so that the collectors would have to keep coming back to the store every couple weeks to see what new things were there. And that was another way of sort of forcing scarcity onto a situation where it doesn't truly exist, to keep interest up in the collector's mind. So there's things like that that happen, but you know, and that still happened today. But I also think that with everything that's happened since the pandemic, and we've talked so much about this on retroblasting, where the supply chain issues are really bad for toys. Like if you go to a lot of big box stores, depending on where you live, they may be almost empty. Like certain aisles, certain types of toys, if you're looking for a specific thing, they may not have any, or they may have all of just like one character that nobody wants. It's a peg warmer and like nothing else. So it's very hit or miss, like much more so than it was even like 4 or 5 years ago.
Right. Wow. I have to admit, I've not been in a toy store for a very long time.
Yes, well, I mean, I'm married to a collector, so definitely more aware of what's going on in the toy aisle, than
Yeah.
maybe some other folks, but
Yeah. I would like to. I'm not dissing it at all. I would love to go and have a look around.
oh, yeah, for sure. Well, come on over to America. We don't have Toys R Us anymore, but we have lots of stores with toys. So,
Yes.
I wanted to briefly touch on where Beanie Babies are today in because Ty still is a company and Ty still makes Beanie Babies that they don't look the same. So this is the well, there we go. This is the current Valentine's Day because it's almost Valentine's Day here. Line of Beanie Babies. You can see that they've sort of changed the way they look a lot. I
Yeah.
don't love it, I gotta say. I don't the eyes kind of freak me out a little bit. They've got, like, oversized, crazy big eyes with glitter irises, which is a little unnerving to me. It kind of reminds me of the way My Little Pony switched to almost an anime style from the original, so that they have these huge eyes and they look malformed to me.
To me, it looks like Puss in Boots when he's trying to look pathetic and
Oh,
curry
yeah.
favor with somebody.
That's true,
Yeah.
especially the second from the left guy over here. He's got
Yeah,
the yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Oh, um, which I know Ty Warner was really big on the eye contact, like, kind of the sad face on the stuffed animal.
Mm,
Recently, I was in a Joann's, which I love going to Joann's because it's a craft store, and I love crafty, knitting and baking and all sorts of things like that, and I had to take a photo, and I remember standing in the store texting it to you, Conrad. This photo I took in my local, Joann's of Beanie Babies and Ty toys, in a Joann's. So I would say that's a medium box store. It's not a Walmart, but you can tell that it's all of his toys are kind of in a big they're not a bin, but it's sort of essentially in a big pile, which he
yeah.
had always been so opposed to back in the 90s. Like, he was super against big box stores because he thought if you put all of these in a giant bin, it's just going to look like there's so many of them. They're not going to look exclusive and they're not going to look limited. And that's what makes people want to buy them.
Yeah, and he was remembering what it was like at the trade shows. He was so particular about presentation, and
Yeah.
I can't see him particularly seeing that what it's become as his ideal. But yeah, I
No.
remember texting back to you, back away from the Beanie Babies. I
Look at
was
this
really
one.
concerned.
It's a goat, and it's so cute. It's probably the cutest one I have. He's got a cute little goat face. Most of them are not cute, but this one's very squishy and cute.
Yeah.
I like it. I do like the ones I have, but I've really looked at a lot of them, and most of them I'm like, I can hard pass on that. I do want to acknowledge both the book and the documentary that we did a lot of this research from. So the book is called The Great Beanie Baby Bubble, Mass Delusion and the Dark Side of Cute by Zach Bissonette. And I did listen to the audiobook, and the guy who reads the audiobook has got a very dull voice, but the content is very interesting. And then, of course, on HBO, Beanie Mania, you can see all of the people, not really Ty Warner because he doesn't ever give interviews. He refuses to speak to anyone. I think he's only given one interview, and it was like right at the beginning of Beanie Babies to People Magazine. But he doesn't talk to people. He's very private.
Yeah.
But you can see them all talking about this. It's very interesting to watch. Highly recommend if you have HBO. Definitely put it on. It's insane. It's absolutely insane.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I found this out. I was kind of excited about this, Conrad. So apparently they're making a movie, like a movie, a drama about the book,
Oh
um,
wow.
starring Zach Galifianakis and Elizabeth Banks, and they're literally filming it in Marietta, Georgia, which is just a hop, skip, and a jump from here.
Oh wow.
So I could literally drive up the street maybe and see them filming Beanie Baby stuff. which is
be an extra. Take your beanies.
So yeah, that's where we are now with Beanie Babies and collecting and all of that.
Coming to Apple Plus soon.
Coming to Apple Plus soon. We'll see if it really does, or if it just sort of fades away and it never comes to pass. But I want to read. We had some super chats. Most of them I think were way back at the beginning, but I do want to read them. So Scuba Pete says, "Beware the chutney ferrets," which is, of course, a reference to our Riff Tracks game show that we do. Conrad,
It's not a model of Beanie Baby.
it's definitely not.
No, I wouldn't like to read the poem on that one.
Wow. Yeah, exactly. Master Son, wow, says, "I heard there's a bounty on my head, so I'm paying for my freedom." And this is because he decided to start something with me last night during the War Stories episode. I was in the chat, and he decided to tell me that women belonged in the kitchen making
Oh my.
sandwiches. And so I just popped back off to him and told him, don't start none won't be none. And here we go. And then, wow, Analog Toy says, "I'm upping the bounty on Master Son's head." Wow, there was some drama going on at the beginning of this. Oh my God. And then Master Son says, "I'm back off the bounty and it's called soccer." Okay. And then Tony says, "Okay, Master Son, this is getting too expensive for me now." Wow, guys, thank you so much. Werewolf by Lunchtime says, "I support Crystal Palace Football Club." And Master Son says, "And that is why the Coast Guard is better than the SAS." Well, not really, but I ran out of stuff to say. So, all right. That was a whole crazy list of things. Yeah, so I'm trying to make sure there weren't any others. I don't think there are any other super chats to read. So, oh boy, people are asking if there is a Beanie Baby that I want that I don't have. Well, no. The answer is no. Did I miss a super chat, dear? Michael? I can hear him coming downstairs. Just yell it out, dear.
I'm gonna yell out the super chats. So you had
one. They weren't starred, so no one was.
So
Chazilla says, "Hello, Melinda and Conrad. Got here late. No idea what the topic is, but happy to be here. Even happier to see you." Thank you so much. King Eric Greatest of All said, "Melinda, if Michael didn't have all his toys, would you have glass cases full of Beanie Babies and Furbies?" Absolutely not. No. Please don't start sending me Beanie Babies. Please don't send them. I have all the ones I want. King Eric says, "Were the Beanie Babies more popular than Furbies?" I think so. Although I do know that Furbies were, definitely a big deal. And I just, again, I don't know what, I don't have that data, but it does seem to me, just from having read about these things, that the spike, like the sudden spike, was much more profound with Beanie Babies than with Furbies. I think Furbies was like a little bit smushed down curve, and I just made myself go blurry. But
yeah, I think with that it was more like sort of like the Buzz Lightyear. I think it was like the it toy for one particular season that everybody had to have, and then it was gone.
Yeah,
but maybe that's just my imagination.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that pretty much wraps up what we're talking about today, right? Like
it does, yeah.
Yeah. So you can find all of our show notes with all of our links to all of our sources at retroblaster.com/Dreamland. We'll be back in February and with our next show, and we will be talking. Conrad, what are we going to be talking about? What is the mystery title for our show in February?
So the magic word for our next episode is Fallout.
Ooh, Fallout February. That's like a lovely alliteration, isn't it?
It is. What could it be?
What could it be? who could it be now? So until then, you can follow me and Conrad on Retroblasting and Movie Oubliette respectively on all the social media outlets, and you can email us at thedreamlandpodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.